In 42 years of practicing medicine across 12 star systems, Dr. Tissera VYNN had never once dropped her datapad during an examination. She had cataloged over 400 species. She had treated acid-blooded reptilians without flinching. She had performed surgery on a creature whose organs rearranged themselves every 6 hours. Nothing surprised her anymore. That record ended on a Tuesday. The Palori physician stood in exam room 9 aboard the Galactic Union medical frigate Gentle Dawn, preparing for what should have been the most boring task of the month. A routine biological screening. First contact protocol required it whenever a new species joined the Union, and humanity had just made its introduction 3 weeks ago. A small diplomatic team had arrived at Union Station 7, and before any treaties could be signed, someone had to sit in her chair and let her take readings. The volunteer was a human male named Ravidar. He was a field medic with their delegation. Average height for his species. Brown skin. Dark eyes that seemed to find everything amusing. He sat on the exam table with his legs dangling over the edge like a child at a playground. And he smiled at her the way someone smiles at a dentist they are not afraid of. "So how does this work?" he asked. "Do I need to take anything off?" "No," Tessara said. "The scanner will read through your clothing. Please remain still." She activated the bioscanner and waited for the first results. The Palori were thin, translucent-skinned beings. Their bodies were delicate and refined, evolved on a world where the greatest threats had been engineered away thousands of years ago. Tessara considered herself unshakable. The first reading came back. She blinked. Core body temperature, 37 degrees. For Palori, anything above 30 was a medical emergency. This human was running what her species would consider a dangerous fever as his normal resting state. She noted it and moved on. Blood composition next. The scanner identified iron, actual metallic iron, bonded into his blood cells. Iron was a toxin. It corroded Palori tissue on contact. This creature used it to carry oxygen through his body. Bone density, extraordinary. Muscle fiber count, extreme. Cardiovascular output, far beyond anything in her database for a non-predatory sapient species. Tessara quietly changed his file classification from standard to class warning and kept her face neutral. "Everything all right?" Ravi asked. "Fine," she lied. "I have some basic questions. How do humans rest?" "We sleep," he said. "About 7 or 8 hours a night. You just kind of shut down and go unconscious for a while." Tessara paused. "You lose consciousness voluntarily?" "Every day. Every night, yeah. If we do not sleep, we start to go crazy. Literally. Hallucinations, organ failure, eventually death." She wrote that down carefully. "And nutrition. We eat plants and animals. Cooked, usually. Sometimes raw. You consume other living organisms. Well, they are dead by the time we eat them. Mostly." Tessara moved on before her stomach could react. "Physical maintenance. Exercise," Ravi said. "We put our bodies under stress on purpose. Lift heavy things, run long distances. It damages our muscles a little bit, and then they grow back stronger. You damage yourselves to become stronger. That is the idea, yeah." Tessara finished the general questions and moved to the blood sample. Ravi held out his arm without hesitation. She drew a small vial and placed it under the deep tissue scanner. The results populated her screen almost instantly, and then she saw them. Millions of them. Tiny, distinct organisms swimming through his bloodstream alongside his red blood cells. Different shapes, different sizes. Some were consuming things. Some were producing chemical signals. Some were attached to larger structures she could not immediately identify. Her datapad nearly slipped from her fingers. "Mr. Thar," she said slowly, "are you aware that your bloodstream contains millions of foreign organisms?" Ravi glanced at the screen. "Oh, those? Yeah. You're carrying what appears to be a massive parasitic infection. I need to begin treatment immediately." Ravi laughed. Not a nervous laugh. A real one. The kind of laugh someone makes when a child says something innocent and wrong. "Those are not parasites, Doc," he said. Tessara stared at him. "Then what are they?" "That is my immune system." He leaned forward slightly, still smiling. "You want me to explain how it works?" Tessara looked at the screen again. The tiny organisms were moving with purpose. Some of them were surrounding a foreign microbe she had not even noticed, closing in on it from all sides. As she watched, they tore it apart, consumed it, destroyed it completely. Then they moved on, hunting for more. This was happening inside him right now. While he sat there smiling at her, she pulled up a chair. Her assistant, a young Palori intern named Finn, stood in the corner with wide, translucent eyes, clutching his own datapad like a shield. Yes, Tessara said quietly. I think you had better explain. Ravi settled back on the exam table, completely relaxed, completely unaware that what he was about to describe would change galactic medicine forever. All right, he said. So, where we come from, everything is trying to kill us. Nobody in the history of Galactic Union medicine had ever used the word battlefield to describe the inside of a living body. Tessara was beginning to understand why. No species had ever needed to, until the humans. Ravi sat on the exam table with his hands resting on his knees, speaking in the easy tone of someone explaining how to change a tire. The words coming out of his mouth, however, belonged in a war report. So the thing about Earth, he said, is that every surface, every drop of water, every breath of air is full of things that want to get inside you and eat you alive. Bacteria, viruses, fungi, parasites. Billions of them. They are everywhere. They're on this table right now. Actually, they came in with me. Finn, the young intern standing in the corner, took a very deliberate step backward. Tessara kept her voice steady. And your species has no environmental controls? No atmospheric purificación. We do now in some places, but for most of our history, no. We just had to deal with it. So our bodies built an army. He pointed at the scanner screen where his blood sample was still displayed. See those big ones? Those are macrophages. They're like the frontline soldiers. When something gets into the body that should not be there, macrophages find it and eat it. They just swallow it whole and dissolve it with chemicals. Tessara watched the screen. A large cell was indeed engulfing a smaller organism, wrapping around it completely, absorbing it into itself. The foreign organism struggled for a moment, then went still, dissolved from the inside. What happens to the macrophage? She asked. It keeps going. Finds the next one. Eats that too. How many can it consume? Depends. Some of them eat dozens before they die. When they finally break down, their remains become part of what you see as pus. That yellowish stuff is basically a pile of dead soldiers and dead enemies mixed together. Finn made a small sound. Tessara did not look at him. She could not look away from the screen. Ravi continued. Now, macrophages are just the basic troops. The real specialists are the T cells. He pointed to smaller, faster-moving cells in the sample. These are the coordinators. When the macrophages find an invader, they send chemical signals, like alarms, and the T cells respond. Helper T cells organize the attack. They figure out what the enemy is and call in the right units. And the killer T cells? Tessara asked, reading the label on her scanner. Those are exactly what they sound like. When a cell in your body has already been infected, when the enemy has gotten inside one of your own cells and is using it to make copies of itself, killer T cells find that cell and destroy it. Tessara set her datapad down. They destroy the infected cell? Your own cell? Yes. The body sacrifices its own tissue to stop the infection from spreading. It is like burning a house to stop a fire from reaching the village. The room went quiet for a moment. Tessara could hear the hum of the station's air recyclers. She had treated species that surrendered entire limbs to save themselves from infection. But those were emergency amputations. The humans did this at the cellular level, automatically, thousands of times a day, without even knowing it. There is more, Ravi said, almost apologetically. When the infection is really bad, the body has another option. Fever. I notice your baseline temperature is already extremely high, right? 37 degrees is normal for us. But when the immune system detects a serious threat, it cranks the temperature up even higher. 39, 40, sometimes 41 degrees. The heat slows down the invaders because most of them cannot reproduce as well at higher temperatures. It also speeds up our own immune cells. But that temperature would damage your own tissues as well. It does. That is the trade-off. The body basically sets itself on fire from the inside to kill whatever is attacking it. If the fever gets too high, it can cause brain damage or death. But usually the immune system knows what it is doing. Usually, Tessara repeated. Yeah, usually. She pressed her fingertips against her temples. The Palori had spent 10,000 years building sterile environments, purifying their air and water, eliminating every microbe from their world so that their fragile bodies would never have to face infection. It was the greatest achievement of their civilization. The humans had taken the opposite path. They had kept the microbes. They had kept the danger. And they had built a war machine inside their own blood to fight it every single day from the moment they were born until the moment they died. Dr. VYNN, Ravi asked, "You okay? You have been quiet for a while." She looked up at him. This man was, at this very moment, fighting a war inside his body. His cells were killing and dying in numbers she could not calculate. Chemical signals were firing. Invaders were being hunted and consumed. And he sat there asking if she was okay. "I am fine," she said. "Please continue." "You sure? We have not even gotten to the really interesting part yet." Finn sat down on the floor. He did not trust his legs anymore. Tessara picked up her datapad again. "Tell me everything." Finn had always believed that the strangest moment of his medical career would be the time a Bravari patient sneezed and accidentally launched 3 quills into the ceiling. He was wrong. That record was being broken right now, one sentence at a time, by a creature who treated biological warfare like small talk. Tessara had taken a short break after part 2 of the explanation. She had stepped into the hallway, pressed her back against the cold metal wall, and stared at nothing for about 4 minutes. Then she came back in, sat down, and told Ravi to continue. "So we covered the basics," Ravi said, stretching his arms above his head like a man settling in for a long story. "Macrophages eat the invaders. T-cells coordinate and kill. Fever cooks everything. But here's where it gets really clever." "Clever," Tessara repeated flatly. "Your body learns." He explained it simply. When the immune system encountered a new pathogen for the first time, the fight was hard. The body had never seen this enemy before. It took time to figure out the right weapons. People got sick, sometimes very sick. Sometimes they died. But if they survived, something remarkable happened. After the battle was over, the immune system created special cells called memory cells. These cells carried a complete record of the invader, its shape, its chemical signature, its methods of attack, and exactly how to destroy it. These memory cells live for years, Ravi said. Some of them last your entire life. And if that same pathogen ever comes back, the immune system does not have to figure it out again. It already knows. The response is faster, stronger, and more precise. The second time, most people do not even feel sick. Tessara processed this slowly. "You are telling me that every disease a human survives makes them harder to kill." "That is exactly what I am telling you." She pulled up her galactic medical database and ran a cross-reference. No other cataloged species had adaptive immunity at this level. Some had basic chemical defenses. A few had symbiotic organisms that helped fight infection. But none of them learned. None of them remembered. The human immune system kept a library of every war it had ever fought. And it used that library to win the next one faster. "This is why some of your childhood diseases do not affect you as adults," she said, connecting the pieces. "Right? You get sick once as a kid, and your body remembers it forever. Chicken pox, measles, mumps. One and done, for most people." Finn spoke for the first time in 20 minutes. His voice was small. "What if the pathogen changes? What if it comes back different?" Ravi looked at him with a kind expression. "Good question. Some pathogens mutate. They change their shape to avoid being recognized. Influenza does this, the flu. It shifts just enough every year that our memory cells do not always catch it. So we get sick again, and the immune system has to update its records." "An arms race," Tessara murmured. "Exactly. It has been going on for millions of years. The germs get smarter. We get smarter. Back and forth." Then Ravi said something that made Tessara grip the edge of her desk. "But we found a shortcut." He explained vaccination. The concept was so alien to Palori medicine that Tessera had to ask him to repeat it 3 times. Humans took a pathogen, a real, deadly disease organism, and they weakened it, or killed it, or took it apart, and kept only the pieces that the immune system needed to recognize. And then they injected it into their own bodies. On purpose. Into healthy people. Into children. You infect yourselves, Tessera said. With diseases. Deliberately. With safe versions of diseases. The immune system sees the weakened pathogen, thinks it is a real threat, and mounts a full response. Memory cells are created, and now that person is protected against the real thing without ever having to actually get sick. You train your army with practice enemies. That is a great way to put it, actually. Finn looked at Tessera. Tessera looked at her screen. The numbers were there. Vaccination had saved more human lives than any other medical invention in their history. Billions. They had taken their own deadliest enemies and turned them into training tools. And then Ravi mentioned one more thing, almost as an afterthought. Oh, and mothers pass antibodies to their babies, through the blood before birth, and through breast milk after. So a newborn human already carries its mother's immune experience. Before the baby ever faces a single germ on its own, it has a head start. A borrowed shield. The room was silent. Tessera stared at the environmental data for Earth that she had pulled up earlier. The numbers glowed on her screen. Volatile star. Unstable tectonic plates. Extreme temperature ranges. An atmosphere full of microorganisms. 70% of the surface covered in salt water that would kill most galactic species on contact. She turned to Finn. Her voice was barely above a whisper. They're not from a planet, Finn. They're from a proving ground. And everything about them, everything, is built to survive it. Finn said nothing. He just looked at Ravi, who was sitting on the exam table, humming a tune to himself, completely unaware that he had just rewritten galactic biology. The report hit the Galactic Union Health Council like a rock thrown into still water. Tessera had submitted it expecting a standard review process, 2 weeks of committee reading, a few follow-up questions, and a quiet filing into the species database. Instead, the document was flagged within an hour, reviewed by a senior panel within 3. And by the end of the first day, it had been forwarded to every medical institution, military advisor, and diplomatic office in the Union. The second day, it was the most read medical document in galactic history. The reactions came fast and loud. The Palori medical community responded first. They were stunned. For 10,000 years, the Palori had believed that the only path to health was the elimination of threats, sterile cities, purified air, engineered food. Their entire civilization was built on the idea that the body was fragile and the world must be made safe for it. The humans had done the opposite. They had kept the dangerous world and made the body dangerous in return. The Bravari were next. The insectoid species reproduced in massive colonies, laying hundreds of eggs at a time, because disease wiped out so many of their young that sheer numbers were their only defense. When the Bravari delegation read that a single human could fight off infections that would kill an entire Bravari clutch, their ambassador requested an emergency session with the Health Council. The question was not academic. It was existential. If one species could do what took them 1,000 bodies to achieve, what did that say about the Bravari approach to survival? But it was the Dorvani who reacted with the most fear. The crystalline species existed inside sealed atmosphere suits at all times. Their lattice-based biology was so fragile that even mild bacteria could cause structural fractures in their bodies. A common cold, by human standards, would shatter a Dorvani from the inside out. When they learned that humans carried trillions of microorganisms on their skin, in their mouths, and their stomachs, and considered this normal, the Dorvani ambassador formally requested that all humans on Union Station 7 be placed under immediate quarantine. Not to protect the humans, to protect everyone else. The debate in the Union Assembly was fierce. A coalition of 7 species supported quarantine protocols. Their argument was simple and, Tessera admitted privately, not unreasonable. A healthy human was a biological ecosystem. Every handshake, every breath, Every surface they touched left behind microorganisms that most galactic species had no defense against. The humans were not weapons, but they were carriers. Walking, talking, smiling carriers. Others pushed back. The Red Hani, a species of tall, four-armed diplomats known for their calm logic, pointed out that the humans had been on the station for 3 weeks already. If their microorganisms were going to cause a pandemic, it would have happened by now. The humans had been sharing spaces, breathing the same recycled air, even offering to share their food. No outbreaks had occurred. Meanwhile, the humans themselves had no idea any of this was happening. Ravi and his delegation continued their diplomatic tour of the station. They visited the gardens. They tried Palori music and politely pretended to enjoy it. Ravi spent his free time with Finn, the young intern, asking him questions about Palori culture with what seemed like genuine fascination. Finn found this confusing. He had read the medical report. He knew what was happening inside Ravi's body at every moment. Armies clashing, cells dying, chemical warfare at a scale that would terrify any Palori general. And yet this man sat across from him in the cafeteria, laughing at his own jokes and asking if Palori had anything like ice cream. "You're not what I expected," Finn told him one evening. "What did you expect?" Ravi asked. Finn thought about it. "Something more frightening." Ravi smiled. "Give it time." Finn did not know if he was joking. Tessara was summoned to present her findings to the full Health Council in person. She stood before hundreds of delegates from dozens of species in the great circular chamber of Union Station 7 Central Hall. She presented the data, clinically: temperature, blood composition, cellular defense mechanisms, adaptive immunity, vaccination. When she finished, the chamber was silent for a very long time. Finally, a Bravari delegate raised a thin, quilled arm. "Dr. VYNN, what happens when their immune system fails?" Tessara had hoped nobody would ask that. She pulled up her final data set. "Autoimmune diseases," she said. "In some cases, the human immune system makes an error. It identifies the body's own healthy tissue as a threat and attacks it. The army turns on the nation it was built to defend." She displayed the list. Rheumatoid arthritis, the immune system destroying joint tissue. Type 1 diabetes, immune cells killing the cells that produce insulin. Multiple sclerosis, the immune system stripping the protective coating from nerve fibers. "Even in failure," Tessara said quietly, "human biology is violent." The chamber remained silent. Hundreds of eyes, of every shape and color, stared at the data on the screen. The numbers were undeniable. The implications were staggering. Somewhere on the station, completely unaware that a species was being debated like a natural disaster, Ravi was teaching Finn how to play cards. The alarm tore through Union Station 7 at exactly 1400 hours, and within minutes, the corridors that had been full of diplomats and scientists became rivers of panic. A cargo vessel from a frontier colony had docked that morning. Standard procedure. Routine supply run. But somewhere in its sealed containers, buried in organic packing material, variety spores had been growing for days. By the time the cargo bay doors opened, the air was already thick with them. Invisible, silent, and spreading fast, variety spore infection attacked respiratory tissue. For species with internal defenses, it was manageable. For the Palori, whose bodies had evolved in sterile perfection, it was a death sentence. The spores latched onto lung tissue and began consuming it. Without heavy medical intervention, a Palori would suffocate in 3 to 4 days as their lungs slowly dissolved from the inside. The first cases appeared within 2 hours. A dock worker collapsed in the cargo bay, then a maintenance technician, then 3 scientists in a nearby lab. By evening, over 100 Palori were in the medical ward, struggling to breathe, their translucent skin turning a sickly gray. Tessara had not slept. She moved through the ward like a ghost, directing her staff, allocating the dwindling supply of antifungal medication, making decisions no doctor should have to make about who received treatment first. The station had enough medicine for maybe 200 patients. The infection was spreading faster than that. Finn was helping. He carried supplies, ran scans, and tried to keep his hands from shaking. He was scared. He had read about variety outbreaks in medical school, but reading about death and watching it walk toward you were very different things. And then the humans showed up. Ravi appeared at the medical ward entrance with 6 other members of the human delegation. They were not panicking. They were not wearing protective gear. They walked in like people arriving at a work site, ready to do a job. "We are here to help," Ravi said. The station commander, a tall red Hani named Advisor Dalla, blocked the doorway. "You are diplomatic guests. This is a medical emergency. I cannot allow civilians into a contaminated zone. I am a trained field medic," Ravi said calmly. "And more importantly, the variety spore cannot hurt us." Dalla hesitated. Tessara stepped forward. "He may be right," she said. She had been thinking about this since the outbreak began. She pulled Ravi aside and drew a quick blood sample. Under the scanner, the answer was immediate and astonishing that Ravi's blood was full of dead variety spores. His macrophages had identified them, attacked them, and destroyed them. His immune system had fought and won an entire battle against the infection in the time it took him to walk from his quarters to the medical ward. He had been exposed to the same spores that were killing Palori by the dozen. His body had treated them like a minor inconvenience. "He is clean," Tessara told Dalla. "His immune system neutralized the spores. All of the humans will be the same. They are immune." Dalla looked at Ravi for a long moment. Then she stepped aside. The humans went to work. Ravi organized triage. He moved through the rows of sick Palori with steady hands, checking vitals, adjusting medication dosages, speaking softly to patients who could barely breathe. 2 human engineers helped repair a broken air filtration unit that was supposed to contain the spore spread. A human logistics officer took over supply distribution so that Tessara's exhausted staff could focus on treatment. And then there was Priya Nair. The human biologist had been part of the diplomatic team as a science advisor, but she had training in microbiology. She found Tessara in the lab and made a proposal. "Your medicines are treating the symptoms," Priya said, "but they're not killing the spores fast enough. Let me look at how my immune system beat them. If we can figure out what my white blood cells use to destroy the spores, we might be able to synthesize something that works for Palori biology." They worked together through the night. Priya's blood samples became a roadmap. Her macrophages had produced a specific enzyme to break down the spore walls, something no Palori medication had ever targeted. With Tessara's knowledge of Palori physiology and Priya's understanding of immune chemistry, they engineered a new antifungal compound by morning. The first patients who received it started breathing easier within hours, but not everyone was saved in time. Fenn collapsed at his station just before dawn. He had been exposed early during the first wave. He had kept working anyway, saying nothing, helping others while the spores quietly consumed his lungs. Ravi found him on the floor. He picked up the young Palori in turn. So light, so fragile, his translucent skin almost gray, and carried him to the nearest bed. He administered the new compound himself, and then he sat down in a chair beside the bed and did not move. Tessara found him 6 hours later. Fenn was unconscious, breathing shallow but steady. The compound was working. He would survive. And Ravi was still there, one hand resting gently on the edge of the bed, watching the monitors, adjusting the drip line when it slowed, talking softly to a boy who could not hear him. She stood in the doorway and watched. This man's body had destroyed the variety spore without effort. His species carried armies in their blood. They set themselves on fire to kill infections. They injected their children with diseases to make them stronger. And here he sat, holding vigil over a boy from another world. Because that was what humans did. They fought, and then they stayed. 312 lives. That was the final number. 312 Palori, Bravari, and Ret Hani, who had been pulled back from the edge of suffocation by a compound that had not existed 30 hours earlier. A compound built by studying the blood of a species that the Galactic Union had been debating whether to quarantine. Fenn woke up on the second morning after the outbreak. The first thing he saw was the ceiling of the medical ward. The second thing he saw was Ravi, asleep in the chair beside his bed, still wearing the same clothes from 2 days ago. His hand was resting near the edge of the bed, close enough to reach the monitor controls without standing up. Fenn stared at him for a while. This strange, warm, impossible creature. His body was a war zone. His blood was a graveyard of defeated invaders. His immune system had destroyed the variety spore the way a person swats a fly, without thought, without effort, without even noticing. And instead of resting, instead of celebrating his own invulnerability, he had carried a pylori intern to a hospital bed and refused to leave. Finn reached out and tapped Ravi's arm. The human woke instantly, alert, his eyes scanning the monitors before they found Finn's face. "Hey," Ravi said. "Welcome back." "You stayed," Finn said. His voice was rough and weak. "Of course I stayed." "Why?" Ravi looked at him like the question made no sense. "Because you needed someone to stay." 2 decks above them, Tessara sat alone in her office. The crisis was over. The spore had been contained. Priya's compound was being synthesized in bulk for distribution across the Union. The station was recovering, but Tessara was not writing containment reports. She was rewriting her original medical assessment of humanity. The first version, the one that had set the galaxy on fire, was sitting in a folder on her desk. She opened it and read through it one more time. It was accurate. Every word of it was accurate. Core temperature, dangerous. Blood composition, toxic. Internal defense system, violent, adaptive, relentless. IT was also completely wrong. Not wrong in its data. Wrong in what it missed. A report that described human biology without describing human behavior was like describing a star by listing its chemical elements. Technically correct, but it told you nothing about the light. She deleted the old file and started over. The new title read, "On the Resilience and Compassion of the Human Species." She wrote about the immune system. She wrote about the macrophages and the T cells and the fevers and the vaccinations. She kept all the biology because it mattered. But then she wrote about what had happened during the outbreak. She wrote about Ravi organizing triage within minutes of arriving, moving through rows of dying pylori with the calm focus of someone who had seen suffering before and had decided long ago that the only acceptable response was action. She wrote about Priya working for 30 straight hours, surviving on nothing but water and determination, to reverse engineer a cure for a species she had met 9 days ago. She wrote about the human volunteers who had carried sick Bravari to the medical bay. The Bravari had defensive quills, sharp biological needles that extended involuntarily when a host was in distress. The humans who carried them came away with bleeding hands and forearms, punctured by dozens of quills. They did not stop. They did not complain. And Tessara noted in her report that by the time the volunteers returned for their second trip, the wounds on their hands were already closing, clotting, healing, the human body repairing itself in real time while its owner walked back into danger to carry another stranger. She wrote it all down. Every piece of it. 3 days later, she stood before the Health Council again. The same circular chamber, the same hundreds of delegates, the same silence, but this time it felt different. Heavier, more aware. Tessara presented the revised report. She walked through the biology again, briefly. Then she walked through the outbreak, the treatment, the volunteers, the vigil. When she reached her conclusion, she paused and looked out across the chamber. The humans were shaped by a world that tried to kill them every single day, she said. Their biology is a record of 10,000 wars fought and won at the cellular level. They carried death inside them, and they turned it into a shield. She took a breath. But what no scan or sample can capture is this. They did not evolve merely to survive. They evolved to protect. I watched them walk into a contaminated zone without hesitation. I watched them bleed for species they had never met. I watched a man sit beside a dying boy for 6 hours because he believed no one should be alone when they are afraid. She let the silence hold for a moment. It is my recommendation that the Galactic Union not quarantine humanity. It is my recommendation that we welcome them. Not because they are safe. They're not safe. They will never be safe. But the galaxy has never had guardians like this before. And we need them. The vote was not unanimous, but it was overwhelming. The quarantine proposal was rejected. The humans would stay. That evening, Ravi and Finn sat together in the station's observation lounge. The viewport stretched from floor to ceiling, showing a field of stars so dense it looked like spilled light. The station hummed quietly around them. The crisis was over. The dead had been mourned. The living were healing. Finn was wrapped in a thermal blanket, still recovering, but his color was returning. He looked out at the stars and then at Ravi. "Are you really not afraid of anything?" he asked. Ravi laughed softly. "I am afraid of plenty of things." "Then how do you keep going?" "All of you. How do humans walk into danger like that, knowing what it might cost?" Ravi thought about it for a long moment. The stars reflected in his dark eyes. Somewhere inside him, his immune system was quietly doing its work, killing, cleaning, rebuilding, remembering. A war without end, fought so silently that he would never hear it. "I guess we just decided a long time ago," he said, "that being scared is not a good enough reason to stop." Finn looked at him. Then he looked back at the stars. And for the first time since the outbreak, he was not afraid either.